Rodney Hall with Fame Recording Studios. I am the general manager and president of recording studios and publishing companies. I'm the president of the Muscle Shoals Music Association, as well as on the board of the Muscle Shoals Music Foundation, which is Muscle Shoals Sound at 3614 Jackson Highway. So back in the 50s, my dad and Billy Sherrill and Tom Stafford all got together. My dad and Billy were writing songs together, and they had written songs for, they'd gotten cuts either together or individually on Brenda Lee and Roy Orbison and George Jones through Chet Atkins and Owen Bradley in Nashville, and they had some success with that, and Tom Stafford heard about it and saw an article in the paper about them and decided he wanted to partner with them, start a publishing company, which became Fame, which was Florence, Alabama Music Enterprises in the beginning. And it was over Tom Stafford's father's drugstore, which was City Drug in Florence on Seminary Street. And they tacked egg cartons to the walls and kind of brought a recorder in and had a makeshift studio and started a publishing company. And that's kind of how it all got going in Florence. The story of Fame is really built around my dad and multiple rhythm sections. There was the first rhythm section, which was David Briggs and Norbert Putnam and Jerry Kerrigan and Terry Thompson and Peanut Montgomery. And those guys cut the first dozen or so hit records on Jimmy Hughes and Arthur Alexander and the Tams and Tommy Rowe. And, you know, they went and opened up for the Beatles at Shea Stadium in New York and D.C. So those guys were very successful, and then they left and went to Nashville and became the A-team in Nashville in about 65. And at that point, my dad had to start over with the rhythm section, and that's when he brought in Jimmy Johnson, who was basically the assistant here and was, you know, getting hamburgers and all that kind of stuff. And he slipped in as the guitar player. Roger Hawkins had been hanging around and playing in bands, and all these guys were in bands locally. David Hood came in and started playing trombone and then moved into bass. And then when Spooner Oldham moved to Memphis, Barry Beckett came into town and took his place. So that was the second rhythm section, and they went on and had great success. So they left in '69. They went to Sheffield. Jerry Wexler loaned them the money, and they went over and opened up Muscle Shoals Sound Studios at 3614 Jackson Highway. And it was my dad felt betrayed, and they left and opened up their own place. And not only that, they took several of the staff members from here with them, and took one of his key business partners, Jerry Wexler, loaned them the money, and they went with them. And of course, my dad had a falling out with Jerry over Aretha Franklin, but that's kind of been muddled over the years as well. So the Aretha Franklin sessions happened in 1967, and I Never Loved a Man was cut, Do Right Woman, and then at the end of the sessions, one of the horn players had made some remarks to Aretha that her husband didn't appreciate, and they'd been drinking, and they basically kind of an argument ensued, and the session broke up. Aretha and her husband went to the Downtowner in downtown Florence, and where they were staying, and my dad hung out here with Wexler and drank a few drinks, and then decided he was going to go over and make everything okay, and smooth everything over with Ted White, who was Aretha's husband. And he got over there, and Ted started cussing him, and a fight ensued. And from that point on, Wexler was intent on leaving here and not working with my dad anymore. Although they worked together for 2 more years after that, because Clarence Carter was signed to Atlantic. They were doing a lot of work together, so they couldn't just immediately cut ties. So Wexler and the guys, I guess, got together and over time decided that they were going to open up a studio across town, and they did that. March 20th, 1969, they came in and just told my dad they were leaving. He had just gotten back from L.A. and done a distribution deal with Capitol Records for Fame Records, where he was going to cut the rhythm section in on part of the production royalties. And he came back to tell them that, and they said, "Don't bother, we're leaving. We're not going to stay." So he had this big record deal and no musicians, so it was a big deal. And they went and they opened up Muscle Shoals Sound Studios in Sheffield, which pissed him off because he felt like they were taking the name that he had created in Muscle Shoals and opened up a studio, and it confused the issue. It became where, for example, the Rolling Stones, Keith Richards had been quoted as said, we were going to go down to Muscle Shoals to that studio where they cut all those soul hits. Well, when the Rolling Stones went to Muscle Shoals Sound, they had cut no hits over there. There hadn't been a hit cut. They were the first hit that was cut in the building. So they thought they were coming here when they were actually going there, and so it just confused everything, which is a classic marketing tool. It's to blur the lines. So they did that, and there was hurt feelings for several years. Not as long as people tend to believe, but it was several years that there was animosity, and then they got to my dad and the Swampers got together, and the rest of the other studio owners in town, and started the Muscle Shoals Music Association, which kind of healed a lot of things. And then my dad went over and did Candy Staten and Paul Anka at Muscle Shoals Sound with those guys, and they came over here and did some stuff. So it all healed, but it was rough going there for a little bit. Nashville's been very important to Muscle Shoals. It's our I think we're kind of Nashville's baby brother. In a sense, we've done a lot of different things that they haven't done as far as R&B and soul, but the beginnings of Muscle Shoals music go back to George Jones and Brenda Lee and Roy Orbison and Chet Atkins and Owen Bradley in Nashville. They gave Muscle Shoals its first start. And without that, I don't know that we would be here. Even the first hit record out of Muscle Shoals, "You Better Move On" by Arthur Alexander, is a country record. It's just sung by a black man, and at the time, that wasn't going to be played on country radio, but it was played worldwide on pop radio and R&B radio, and the Beatles heard it, and the Rolling Stones heard it, and they both, the Rolling Stones covered "You Better Move On," which was the first hit out of Muscle Shoals. The B-side of that record was "A Shot of Rhythm and Blues," and the Beatles covered that. The Stones covered "You Better Move On." So on their first records, before they were the Beatles and the Stones. So they had a big influence on the world musically, and that goes back to country music, because those were country records. And even the soul records that were done here over the years, if you go back and look, there's a lot of country in there. There's a lot of country songs, there's a lot of country feelings. My dad always told me that his horn arrangements were just basically fiddle lines that he turned into horns, because he was a fiddle player. So there's country music is vital to Muscle Shoals music, and not only that, over the years through the publishing, it's been our bread and butter. I mean, we've had, I think, 4 Song of the Years for country music. I Swear, There's No Getting Over Me, Holding Her and Loving You, and I Like It, I Love It. We're all songs of the year in the country market. So it's huge. It's huge to us, and it still is. Shenandoah came out of here, and there's been several different phases of Muscle Shoals music over the years. There's been the country era, there's been the pop era, and there's been the R&B era. And now I think we're in an era where it's anything goes. It's all that. So it's, country's kind of the backbone of it all, though. It's the thread that runs through. Yeah, so Mac was very special to us. He recorded 13 albums here and was my dad's buddy. There's a lot of stories with Mac. It goes back to, so the first song recorded in this room was "Steal Away" by Jimmy Hughes, which became a hit. And the record label brought my dad out to L.A., and my mom wouldn't fly, so they went by train. They drove to St. Louis, got on a train, and went to L.A. And he says it's the worst trip he's ever been on in his life. He sat on a toilet all the way to L.A. But when he got to L.A., the train station, dude that worked for the record label came to pick him up, and it was Mac Davis. He was a promotion man for VJ Records at the time. So that's how they met. And then fast forward about 7, 8 years, and he was producing records on him. And Mac was a great writer, and he had already written In the Ghetto and Watching Scotty Grow and Don't Cry Daddy for Elvis and A Little Less Conversation and all these big records, Something Burning for Kenny Rogers. So he was a big songwriter already, and he wanted my dad to produce him, and my dad didn't think he was a great artist, or was an artist, because he's giving all his songs away and blah, blah, blah. But anyway, they got together, went in the studio and started recording, and the magic just happened, and they cut dozens of hit records: Stop and Smell the Roses, Baby Don't Get Hooked on Me, Friend, Woman, Lover, Wife, just tons of records. And so, yeah, Mac did 13 records here, and he stayed with us at our house when he would come to town, and we'd play practical jokes on him and like short sheet his bed and put Vaseline on his toilet seat and all his stuff, and then he would like prank us with mess with our baseball gloves and stuff. And then one day I was at school, and one of my friends says, Mike Davis was talking about you last night on the Johnny Carson show. I'm like, really? That's crazy. So he started telling about us pranking him. And I've never seen that, but I've had several friends tell me they saw it. So that was fun. Be fun to see it. Yeah, so back in the mid 60s, a lot of hit records had started coming out of here. It kind of became the place to go to cut soul records, and Dwayne Allman became a big fan of Clarence Carter's. And so Dwayne had been in a band called Hourglass with Gregg, his brother, Gregg Allman, and actually Pete Carr and Johnny Sandlin, who spent years in the Shoals. Johnny's from Decatur, and that they were in the band, and they'd signed to Liberty Records in L.A., and they had them doing all this pop, psychedelic kind of stuff that Dwayne really wasn't into, and they wouldn't let him tour, and just they were being very controlling, and it wasn't going anywhere. So Dwayne just said, "I'm out of here," and left and came to Muscle Shoals. Gregg stayed in L.A. because they would have let everybody out of the contract except Gregg, because he was the singer, so they kept Gregg under contract. Dwayne came here and camped out in our parking lot and was like trying to get my dad to put him on sessions, and he said, I've got plenty of guitar players, Dwayne. I got them coming out my ears. I don't need another guitar player, without hearing him, because he's just he's a hippie. At this point, there weren't guys with long hair in Alabama in 1965 in Muscle Shoals, for sure. So he was the first one, and so he asked my dad if he could camp out on the parking lot, and he said, "Sure, help yourself. Just don't mess with anything." So he did. He camped out for a few days, and then some of the other musicians heard him play out at some gig or whatever. He came out and jammed with them, and they're like, "Rick, you need to check this guy out. He's really good." So he brought him in and recorded him. The first session he did was Clarence Carter, Road of Love, and from there my dad fell in love with him and signed him to a deal. Signed him to a publishing deal, a management deal, and an artist deal, and they started cutting some solo stuff on him, and they cut 7 or 8 things, one of which went on to be a Johnny Jenkins record, which was a hit on Johnny Jenkins, that the track was done for Dwayne, but Dwayne couldn't sing. He could sing, but it wasn't good. He wasn't Gregg. Gregg was the singer. So my dad kind of wasn't thrilled with the project, and Phil Walden, who was a manager and managed everybody that came through Muscle Shoals, from Percy Sledge to Clarence Carter to Jimmy Hughes and on down the line. And then later he started Capricorn Records. Well, Phil bought Dwayne's contract along with Wexler, and they at that point, and Dwayne had already started putting a band together here. He gave tryouts for the Allman Brothers with J-Mo and Barry Oakley in Studio B. When he wasn't working in A, he would roll his cabinet over to B and jam with those guys. And so then Gregg came down, and when Gregg recorded here, Gregg did his last album here, Southern Blood, and when he recorded here, he told us that he was here, and that it was right before they left to move to Macon, and that he came down, and he had never met J-Mo or Barry Oakley, and he came down and sit in Studio B, and they wanted him to play the songs he had written, so he started playing songs, and he said they went through 6 or 7, and they were just like not interested in his songs at all. Then he got to Dreams, started playing that, and he said about halfway through the song they got up, started playing with him, and then they played it the same way for the next 30 years. So the Allman Brothers were basically born in Studio B, and then they moved to Macon and went on to do their great things. Then in 2016, we got a call, and Gregg wanted to come back and do his final album here, which, you know, they didn't say this is going to be his final album, but we all kind of knew, because we knew he had pretty bad prognosis with cancer and had already had a liver transplant. And so it was really exciting. They came in and for 2 weeks booked out the whole building and camped out and did the record. And, you know, if you've heard the record, Southern Blood, it's really kind of sad to listen to, because it's basically him telling his fans goodbye. And so it was a surreal feeling around the studio that week, although Gregg was really upbeat and was fun to be around, and was, you know, he would get tired easy, but it was a lot of fun. But it was, at the same time, there was a whole feeling of, you know, this is history going down right in front of our eyes. You know, this is the last time this man's going to record, and that he picked us was pretty amazing. And you know, and he did. He said, I want to go back to fame. I want to go where it started and bookend it. And so it's pretty cool. We got some tapes back in the vault. We got a Dwayne Allman tape sitting right next to a Gregg Allman tape. So it's kind of the bookends of the Allman Brothers.
Talk about how the Muscle Shoals documentary impacted the music industry here and fame specifically.
So in probably 2008, a couple guys showed up, in which they weren't the first. There'd been, over the years, we had probably half a dozen to a dozen people show up and want to do a documentary of some sort on Muscle Shoals or on fame or on my dad or whatever. And, you know, they either couldn't get the money or they weren't the right people, or so that didn't happen. And then these guys came in, Stephen Badger and Freddie Camelier, and it's funny, kind of a funny story. They came through town. They were on their high school buddies, and they were on their way just doing a musical road trip, and they came through here, and they had to decide whether they were going to go to Tupelo, where Elvis was born, or Muscle Shoals. And they stopped at the Tennessee Tom Bigby Waterway, and like were just sitting there talking, and just had an epiphany that they needed to come back to Muscle Shoals. So they came back, and the Holiday Inn had music pictures all over the wall where Mickey Buckins and some of the guys had done a songwriters show for years, and there was just music pictures that intrigued these guys, and they started asking questions, and they really didn't know the story. They just knew Muscle Shoals got the Swampers is all they knew, really. Because they grew up, both of them grew up in the, you know, late 60s, early 70s, so they were of that era. And yeah, they started doing some research and said, we need to do a documentary on this. So one of the guys had the means to basically fund part of it, and so they started doing a documentary, and they came and talked to us, and we were iffy on it because they had never done a documentary, and they said, just let us come in and shoot some stuff, and we'll show you what we're doing and see what you think. And we really just became really tight with them. They're great guys and did a great job, better than we could have imagined. And there was a couple other documentaries being shot, and they were all jockeying trying to get finished first. And these guys finished first, and they had the means and the connections more than anything to get it to the right people. And Magnolia Films, which is Mark Cuban's company, came in and bought the rights to it and distributed it, and it was in Sundance. But there's a lot of stories to it. But in the end, it was the thing that turned Muscle Shoals music around. I mean, things were kind of dried up in the 90s and 2000s, and we had publishing going, and that was it. And Napster had come along and changed the music business, and it changed everything. Publishing, anything that had to do with royalties, kind of just dried up. So it was tough times, and they came in, and the documentary came out in 2012 and was just a huge success, and changed our world. I mean, it made Muscle Shoals a music tourism site, which it had never been before. But now there's people, as you guys saw earlier, I'm sure there's thousands of people a year that come here just to see this studio and Muscle Shoals Sound Studio and the Allman Music Hall of Fame, and then they go to W.C. Handy's home and Frank Lloyd Wright home. So, I mean, it changed the game as far as tourism goes in the Shoals. And not only that, it changed the game as far as studio business goes. I mean, it got the word out again, and people want to come here and record and and visit and tour the area, and it's just a very, very positive thing for the whole area. The Muscle Shoals sound is kind of, there's a lot of different trains of thought on that. Some people think there is no Muscle Shoals sound, that it's just specific Muscle Shoals sound. I disagree with that somewhat. I mean, there's not a defined this is it, because we've done everything from country music to jazz to pop so we've done it all. But I think the common thread through it all is soul, is just, and believability, and that the songs are believable, the singers are believable, the musicians, and it's authentic. It's handmade, authentic music. That's what we do, and that's you don't find that many places anymore. That's why I think it's so special. One of the keys to Muscle Shoals, I mean, definitely one of the keys to Muscle Shoals music is the people, the musicians and the songwriters and the engineers and all the people that don't really get the recognition. It's the artist that gets all the recognition, but these guys are the ones that come in here, and people talk about, Fame and Muscle Shoals sound in the buildings and the studios, and yeah, they're great, and we have a great vibe, and we have a great history, but without those guys in this room and the guys in the control room and the grunt work guys, then this stuff never happens. And I think the magic in Muscle Shoals that still exists is that we have a pool of studio musicians that we bring in, and some of them are from Huntsville, some of them are from Nashville, but for the most part they're here, and they're all producers in their own rights. They all bring, the difference between a studio musician and a guy that's playing in a cover band is the guy playing in a cover band is just copying somebody else's work. Where in the studio, they got to come up with the licks and with the grooves and with the instrumentation that, from nowhere. They have to create it. So it's a completely different mindset. And, we're very lucky to have a bunch of great guys, and they all are very generous in their knowledge, and that they pass it down to the next generation. So we've got we're on the second or third generation of musicians that have worked with the original guys, and some of the original guys are still around, David Hood and Clayton Ivey and Spooner Oldham, and they're all very, very generous with their time and with their knowledge of what they've learned, and which is exciting to see it pass from generation to generation. Muscle Shoals we've always been a behind-the-scenes production house and publishing house for the major labels, and I think the world that the internet's brought about, with the good and the bad, and a lot of it is bad, but there are some good sides to that, which gives us the ability and gives people the ability to put their music out, and I just believe that it kind of levels the playing field, whereas it used to be, if you weren't Universal Records or RCA Records and had millions of dollars, you had no shot. You couldn't even get in the door. Whereas now we can put our music out, and I see. Like I say, we're always behind the scenes, production and publishing. I see like managers and record labels and production houses having the ability to move here, and with the rising prices and just the implosion of Nashville on itself, with their growth, there's a lot of people looking down here because it's affordable. It's 2 hours from Nashville, 2 hours from Memphis. kind of centrally located, and I think the sky's the limit. I think we haven't even seen our peak yet.